Gloria Patri et Filio et Spiritui Sancto, sicut erat in principio et nunc et semper, et in saecula saeculorum. Amen. Spiritus Domini, replevit orbem terrarum. Alleluia. Et quod continet omnia scientiam habet vocis. Alleluia. 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 The evangelist, St. Luke, has an eye for detail and a pen enabled to encapsulate it and to describe it well. But here his pen fails. All he can say is that it is similar to a rushing wind. And then he describes these tongues of fire. What happened? We know within the Carthusian family that something similar happened in 1535 when they had to bear witness to the king's officers, but they weren't quite sure what to do. And so they celebrated the Mass of the Holy Spirit. And what happened? There was a manifestation above the altar and above their heads of something similar to what happened at the first Pentecost. Tongues of fire appeared, and they were the first to bear witness, the first of a long army. We have here, therefore, serene power. We have here the force of truth. We have here authenticity. We have here true charity. For fire is also a symbol of love. The Holy Spirit is the personal bond between Father and Son, and this is what fills the universe. The meaning of the universe is love. God made us for ecstatic love in eternity and for a reflection of it in this world. What distinguishes our faith is love. If we compare the Christian ethos over the centuries and also in our time with that of what comes from other cultures and other religions, one sees this essential difference. There is a goodness and a warmth in the air where Christians are gathered. Our gathering should therefore be worthy of the love that we honour, and all that excludes love should be in some way banished from our assemblies. All that nourishes dysfunctionality, all that nourishes division, disunity, should be banished from our assemblies. The big unwritten rubric in all matters liturgical is peace and charity, and that always has to be borne in mind when trying one's best to be obedient to the actual written rubrics in an atmosphere which is not always helpful. To explode and cause pain at the altar is to perform something which is not in harmony with the life of the Spirit. The Lord is calm in his adjusting of things, and charity must be the language of our praise. With regard to the specifically charismatic element, it has to be looked at. we need to be aware that it is easy to fabricate certain things and to call them charismatic. The actual meaning of charismatic is pertaining to the gifts, charismata. These are freely given gifts, but they are concrete gifts and they're not fabricated. They are given and therefore they exist or do not exist. To call a group charismatic when these gifts are not in it is actually abusive. What happens often in such a case is that certain side effects are identified with the essence, and those side effects actually can be in some way derived from another culture if we're not careful, and not be at all really authentic. To get back to what I mentioned, if there is an element of unpeace in our praise, then the question poses itself, is that authentic charismatic praise? I noticed in France that there was less contamination quite often in the way in which the renewal was handled, because it was not coming from an Anglo-Saxon background and therefore in no way Americanized. Because unfortunately, part of our charismatic renewal is influenced by Protestantism because of the origin. Authentic renewal is not just based on manifestations which characterize a certain ethos. One identifies charismatic with these side effects, which are not at all of the essence and are actually things in themselves which deflect from the true center of attention, which is Jesus. Because Jesus is not easily listened to when there's too much exteriorization. True renewal is enthroning Jesus in such a way that truly he is able to reign, and there is a fertile terrain for the reception of his gifts, the gifts of the Spirit, which are potentially the same, but we get things wrong. There are some gifts which are easily imitated. We can fabricate things and call them the gifts. One very important gift is the gift of discernment of spirits. A person who has a strong interior life picks up things. Even actually a child picks up things if that child is into prayer. Now this is the true renewal, when God truly renews from within and not from without. Because from without it can be very much man fabricating and creating the apparent atmosphere. But the atmosphere is not made of certain modes. The atmosphere is there or not there. And many a group contains still many of the trimmings, but the real thing is no longer there. One asks why certain groups grow and are blessed and others get older and older, and yet behave in the same way as they did many years ago with regard to certain outward manifestations. No, charismatic precisely means of the gifts of the Spirit, those charismata which are not fabricated. Let us look at some of these. Things do come to us if we are quiet and trying to adore and love by giving space. I remember talking to friends who had found that this happened. There is a priest friend I have who still finds it happening to him quite a lot. One time he was trying to get to one of his 3 churches, which was actually difficult of access in midwinter. It was on a steep hill, a very steep hill when there is ice especially. And this was that Sunday morning beyond him. He was trying and skidding, and he was abandoning the project. He could not get there for that Sunday morning Mass. And so he started to turn back. But then he heard, and he did hear, in his soul, these words: "Why do you not trust me?" And so he had one last attempt and had one great run up, and he got there in one fell swoop, to the amazement of the sacristan, who thought there would be no question of a celebration that morning and was abandoning the project himself. How did you get here? That same young priest, not that long ago, was in his presbytery, and he was quietly reading fairly late at night when he heard again a similar word in his soul. It was this: go to church. It was bizarre that time. There was a body in it. The body was okay, he verified. Things were normal. Bizarre. And so he again abandoned the project. But then just one last look around outside this time, and he found to his amazement that the boiler was catching fire and about to go into a huge blaze which would have consumed the whole church. They were able to put it out urgently. So these have to be picked up, and they are genuine charismata. We notice that they're not noisy, but they're authentic. The authentic need not be noisy, and on the whole is not. But the authentic is efficacious and hits correctly where there is an effect. In prayer groups, if they are honouring God, they are dishonouring the devil. And so the devil will look around for somebody who has a weakness and will use that weakness to create disunity in that group, and such an element of dysfunctionality that it'll be no longer an efficacious group. It is easy to do. The less structure it is, the more easy to do it is. And so he will find somebody who will use a slot, like a prayer group, actually even a liturgical setting, to have a stage, to have an audience. It is everywhere. People use church settings to have an audience. It is gratifying. Again, pushing Jesus to the wings and standing in honour and glory where he wishes to be enthroned. To get back to where I started, when those Carthusian fathers in the London Charterhouse in 1535 celebrated with gentle chant the Mass of the Holy Spirit in red in the old Carthusian rite, it was not a happy, clappy affair, but it was authentic, and the Spirit heard them and responded and gave them light as to what to answer. I would just like to conclude with one reference to what I heard when I was a child. Wales is a land where there have been many powerful, sweeping revivals. They are not to be easily dismissed, because given that it was hugely, indeed massively, Protestant, it was in that atmosphere that the Spirit of God had to move, and so he found people where they were at. In the specific case of Wales, that spirit was favoured in his operation by the fact that there was a great emphasis on two things: singing with great beauty and preaching with great gusto. And so these were the spaces that he got into and made use of. But this bit is less well known. I heard it from my grandfather, who was a young man, when the 1904-05 revival burst out in the whole of the country at the same time and swept the whole land. This bit is the interesting bit. He was telling us one day how before people had been praying and praying and shouting out, and my mother commented on that. Yes, they're shouting, like that. But they were crying out to the Spirit to come. He was telling us in Welsh, and he just added 2 words after his description of the pleading and the pleading that they had in Wales. Ac mi ddoth, and he came.